right. My name is Emilie Tweardy. Also got Stesha Warren here with us and Austin Unruh. Emilie and Stesha, myself and Stesha, we are with Appalachian Sustainable Development. We are both in the Agroforestry program there. And we are just thrilled to be bringing you this webinar series. Again, we are on our 4th session, 3 more to go. And thank you for joining us. And Austin is here with us this afternoon, evening, wherever you are, morning for Fran over in Australia. And she's been sharing her baking projects with us, which has been fun too. She had hot cross buns the first day. Fran's our like superstar now. But we've got Austin with us today to talk about Silvopasture on a shoestring. So how can we get Silvopasture going cheaply? All right, but first, we're in our welcome right now. We're going to talk a little bit about webinar features and functions in case you're new to Zoom. And if you've heard this before, maybe take a second to think about a question you might like to ask Austin, and you can go ahead and throw that in the Q&A. But when I get done, Austin's going to present for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to move into our Q&A. We've got a bunch of questions collected already, so we'll do about 30 minutes of that and then 30 minutes of live Q&A. It's going to be a good time. First and foremost, if you need closed captioning, click on the little button that says CC. That is a great feature. It allows you to have automatically translated captions, and they can pop up where you can like move them around and everything. It's nice if you're in a loud room and you just want to be watching. So it's a really handy function. Some other functions you might want to use. The Q&A is where we will be having y'all submit your questions for Austin. So if you have a question, don't put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A. If you want to browse the Q&A as the session is going on, and someone has a question that you're like, ooh, I definitely want to hear the answer to that too, you can also like upvote it with a little thumbs up. You can answer it. If you have some information to share, you can drop links in there. We can kind of crowdsource some of those questions. And then the chat function is really a place where we're going to be dropping links to share with you guys. And we will also be, have that open for y'all to be able to chat with each other if you'd like. And then finally, the little raise hand function. When we get to the live Q&A part of the session, basically, if you want to use your voice to ask a question, you can hit the little raise hand. It'll put a little yellow hand in the corner of your box, and it'll put you at the top of our little participant list, and we can unmute you. So that's a good function to know about as well. And participants is circled, but you can just ignore that because I don't think that you guys actually have that function. All right. Intro to ASD, Appalachian Sustainable Development. We're living better locally, folks. Our mission is to build a thriving regional food and agriculture system that creates healthy communities, respects the planet, and cultivates profitable opportunities for Appalachians. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our agroforestry program and some of the resources we have to offer, but definitely check out our webpage if you get a chance. We've got a ton of resources just on the webpage alone, and we've got a lot of really cool programs going on. So please check that out, especially if you're in Appalachia. But most of the stuff that I'm talking about today, you can find where I have this little agroforestry drop down circled. And then also the Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub is the other thing I'll be talking about. So that's where you can find these things. And Sesha will drop those links in the chat as I'm going. So first off, our Agroforestry Technical Assistance Program. This is basically just like free technical assistance to folks in the areas of forest farming, alley cropping, and silvopasture. And so basically you can go online, fill out the TA form, the application. It only takes, like really 10 minutes tops, probably more like 5. And you can share a little information with us on that, and someone will get back to you and will provide you with technical assistance. And that might be anything from just an email share of resources to a phone call or a video meeting, or in funding and locationally dependent, we can also work on site visits if such a thing is called for. We've got a maple woodlot assessment program as well for those in Appalachia who are interested in producing maple syrup and are not sure where to start with that. So you can also fill that form out if you're interested in those services. We are a part of a grant called under the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation. The grant is called the Train the Trainer program. And basically this is geared at natural resources professionals. So if you're someone who is in in the natural resources field and doing public work and any sort of teaching or resources share with folks in forest farming, alley cropping, or silvopasture, this is definitely for you. So you can scroll down on the programs or the agroforestry program page to the Train the Trainer sign up. And you're not signing up for anything. You're not like signing your life away or going to get a bunch of emails. You're just going to get alerts about this particular program and when it's going on, how to access it. We've got field days and in-person workshops. We're setting up demonstration sites, and there's an online course that's launching soon. And I think we'll actually have the real date for that by Tuesday to be able to share with y'all. So definitely check that out. And the Appalachian Harvest Herb Hub is a really cool program that we've got in Duffield, Virginia, is where it's physically located. We have a facility that allows small herb growers to access larger markets and even large herb growers to get their stuff processed and ready to sell. So we have shared equipment, we have processing help and marketing, aggregation, and marketing access help. We do trainings, all kinds of great stuff. Robin Suggs is the contact for that, and he himself is a wealth of information. So if you're an herb grower, please swing by the website and check that out, because we might have some good resources for you, or if you're nearby, you might actually be able to use our facility. And I just want to plug the next session that's coming up on Tuesday. Jonathan McRae of Silver Run Forest Farm is going to be talking about sourcing, selection, and storytelling on his farm. That session's called Wildly Homegrown, because they have a really fun and wild approach to how they run their nursery. So if you liked Sean Dombrowski's session about tree seed or trees from seed, this is going to be another propagation and selection session. So you'll definitely appreciate this one as well. All right, so got Wildly Homegrown, and then we've got a live agroforestry consultation with Eliza Greenman on a week from today. Yeah, that's right. And then our final session with Mark Krawczyk, getting started in Coppicing agroforestry. And session, I got to take an online course with him, and it was fantastic. He's a great presenter. So please stop by that for our final session. I'm going to close that out. All right. So before I hand it over here, I just want to introduce Austin. So first off, I will say, I approached Austin about this session just like cold. Actually, you know what? I think Wynn gave me an introduction. I don't think it was quite a cold open. I don't think I had to cold call you. So thank you, Wynn, for making that connection. But when I did call Austin, he was super generous with his time, and like we spent probably 45 minutes on the phone, and then he said he was down to do a webinar, or like 5 if we wanted to. So
I said 5. I was like 5, 6. Let's do a whole series. So we can get
yeah,
resources out
so
there.
look out, folks. There might be more good stuff coming. But I just want to say I really have appreciated his, as many of the presenters, very generous spirit around sharing his knowledge. So I don't know Austin that well, but I have really just appreciated him for being so like open and forthcoming. You come across gatekeepers in this field sometimes, and he's definitely not that. So a little bit about Austin. He is owner and founder of Trees For Graziers, a company helping farmers in Pennsylvania and beyond, taking their grazing to new heights using silvopasture. And is that not a great tagline, by the way, taking grazing to new heights? It's his goal to make silvopasture as easy and cost-effective as possible for farmers, which is why TFG offers everything from planting and funding acquisition to planting and aftercare, while also growing silvo-specific nursery stock. When not thinking about silvopasture, his favorite activity is picking berries with his young family. So I'm going to hand it over to him and let him do some talking. Welcome, Austin. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for having me, for coordinating all this, for putting this together. I'm always excited to get more resources out there for people to be able to make use of. I love being involved and engaged with education and just spreading this knowledge so that more people can take this and run with it. So let me just start off. Let's get into the meat of it here. I think everyone can see my screen. Are we all good, Emily?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about the silvopasture on a shoestring, because we know that budgets are finite. Everyone only has so much money, and being able to invest in trees is a long-term thing where we don't get any money out of it for the first couple of years. So how do we make this investment in a silvopasture system and be able to cash flow it? So that's the question that we want to attempt to answer in the next 15 minutes. So it'll be pretty rapid fire going through this, and then we'll be able to address questions a little bit more relaxed after that. Okay, so my name is Austin Unruh, and I run Trees for Graziers. We've been planting trees for about 5-6 years now, and really only been focusing on silvopasture for the last 3 years. We did not start out as Trees for Graziers. I actually got my start as doing a lot of work in riparian buffers primarily. We are in southeastern Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of focus on riparian buffers here. So that's how I got my start in agroforestry, is planting and maintaining trees in riparian buffers, which we still do a lot of, but the last couple of years, most of our focus has been on silvopasture and trying to push that practice forward. So when discussing how to do silvopasture on a budget, the first thing, and this is really regardless of how much budget you have, the first thing when we want to go about this establishing trees in our pastures is to understand what our goals are, because it really doesn't matter if you can't identify what your goals are, or if you are going towards the wrong goal, then no matter how much money you can save in the process, if your goal isn't right, if what you're going for is not an actual fit for you and your context, then it doesn't matter how efficiently you do it. It's a waste of your time. So before we dive into this, we want to understand, what is it that we're aiming for? What do we want to achieve, and what's going to move the ball forward for us? Most of the people that we work with are primarily interested in shade. That's the thing that brings most people to us. But then we also talk about windbreaks, about summer leaf fodder, winter feed. We can also talk about aesthetics. We can talk about hunting. We can talk about new income streams from tree crops. So it really, really pays to first have a solid plan in place for what your goals are based on your context, and only then to move forward. So we'll talk a little bit about tactics, about specific methods later on in the presentation, but I wanted to make sure that first we know that we want to be setting our goals well first, and know which direction we are heading. Okay, so step 2 that I recommend is to start with what you already have. So planting trees takes time, it takes money, it takes energy, and oftentimes people have trees growing on their property already that are underutilized because the value in those trees is not recognized. So, for example, this picture shows a farm that I did a consultation at in Virginia, and they have, you can see a little bit, if you're really good at plant identification, you might be able to make out what these are. So there's autumn olive in here, there's honey locust, and there's red cedar right here. So all of these species are species that a lot of people do not like. Yet on this property and on many properties, they were serving a function. So the autumn olive is a great browse. So this property had sheep, and what they wanted to do when they brought us in, and they wanted to clear the cedars and the brush, the autumn olive, and they wanted to then put in a row of white pine. And I looked at them and said, you might not want to do that, because your cedars are providing all the windbreak that you need right now for free. And to get rid of them would cost thousands of dollars. And then to plant the white pines would be a good bit of money. And then you'd have to wait the years and years until you could reap any benefits off of them. So we explored this area a little bit more and said, with a little bit of work, just a fraction of what it would be to clear everything, they could make a really good area for lambing, where animals would be protected, where they would be out of the cold, out of the elements. They had some interesting honey locusts on that site. Some were really thorny, and we said, let's get rid of those. But some were completely thornless, and we can encourage and promote those. So that's just one example of a property where there was a lot of value there, but you had to look at it with the right eyes. And one of the best returns on your investment is learning to see what you already have with new eyes and seeing the value of what you have, and then being able to steward it in the context of what your goals are. So then when it comes to planting trees, when we've decided we do indeed want to plant trees into our pastures, and by the way, that is our primary focus at Trees for Graziers. We do consult a little bit on the removal of trees or the thinning of trees from woods, but primarily our focus is on planting trees into pastures. So if you've decided I want to plant trees into my pastures, what I recommend is let's do that in phases. Let's not jump into it all at once. And that fits very well in the context of Silvopasture on a shoestring, because this allows us to learn from our mistakes. Is what it comes down to. Learn from our mistakes, learn in the process of getting hands-on experiential information. So I tell people, embrace the pace. Trees are a slow moving thing, right? And you only get feedback on them very slowly. So if we were planting lettuce, you get feedback in like 20 days or 40 days or however long it takes to grow lettuce. With trees, you're getting feedback over the course of 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 years is how long it takes for you to learn a lot of these things. So it's something that doesn't want to be rushed. And if you rush it, that is where it gets more expensive, because you make mistakes by putting a tree in the wrong place, or putting trees that you shouldn't have put in there, or without a whole lot of experience, putting a lot of trees out there and maybe seeing a high mortality rate, which is expensive. So by doing this in phases, by going slow, we're able to avoid a lot of costly mistakes. And the more experience you have, the quicker you can go. But most people in the country are starting with zero experience, because silvopasture has really not been done much. Okay, cost share. So thankfully, we don't have to pay all of the cost of getting silvopasture established out of pocket. There's a lot of figures on this page right here. I want you to focus on the stuff at the bottom primarily. Is so there is cost share for silvopasture through NRCS in most states. Not all states, unfortunately. Pennsylvania is one of the states that does not support silvopasture through NRCS yet. I think it is a matter of when, not if. But at this point, there is no support for silvopasture in Pennsylvania, and that's the case for in a number of other states as well. Ohio is one. New York is one that doesn't officially have an NRCS cost share rate for silvopasture. A lot of other states do. A lot of the Appalachian states do have cost share. All states have a different rate for silvopasture. And so it really pays for you to understand how much cost share there is in your state. So the picture up on top, that is an example from Virginia. So that's the cost share rates in Virginia. And Stesha, there's a link at the bottom. I know people can't click on a link in a presentation, but if you could pop that in the chat, I'll leave this slide up for just a little bit longer so you can copy that over and paste it in the chat. I go to that link like every week, way more than most people ever should, so that I can get a firm grasp on how much cost share there is in different states. So in some states like Maryland, they offer $100 an acre for silvopasture. That's the cost share rate for silvopasture in Maryland, which is not going to get you very far. In other states, like in the Midwestern states, Missouri, Wisconsin, I forget, Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa. Those five, I believe, all offer about $30 to $34 somewhere in there per tree, which is a major difference. So depending on what state you are in, you're able to get some NRCS money, some more than others, and it really depends on your state. So in Virginia, let's see, the practice of establishing hardwood trees in open field, what is it? An existing pasture with adequate forages, you're looking at $422 per acre. But there is not a whole lot of guidance. There is some guidance on what kind of density and whatnot. It is, there's not enough funding for silvopasture yet. That is one thing that we are working on. But currently it's best to at least to understand what is currently offered and available, and know that things will likely improve over time, because there is more and more public support for silvopasture as a whole. So when we're planting trees, we want to consider how to protect those trees. And so there's dangers, there's predation coming at those trees from a number of different directions. Voles is the number one thing that I have to be concerned about, or that you have to be concerned about in planting trees into an open pasture, because pasture environments are really great for voles and other rodents. Pastures make just a really good habitat, and voles will kill trees more than anything else. Livestock and other animals will damage trees, but voles will kill them. So we use whatever you can to protect against voles. And I have some recommendations in my book. If you haven't seen, I do have a book out called The Grazier's Guide to Trees. It is available through our website. And I go through there's a lot of resources in the book that we just won't be able to get to here this evening. And then deer, you want a shelter that can protect against browse and against rub. And then there are different considerations based on what kind of livestock you have. So if you have cattle, you need a little bit more protection because they're big. Sheep require less protection just because they're smaller, they can't reach as high. Poultry are an interesting one. They're easy to protect trees from, but we like to use mulch, and chickens really like to scratch at mulch. So if you have chickens in a multi-species silvopasture, keep that in mind. You might not want to put traditional wood chip mulch out there, because it'll probably be a waste of your time if the chickens are out there and scratching away. And then lastly, don't forget to really do your aftercare well. So once the tree is planted, that's not the end, that's just the beginning of the establishment of that tree, because like I said, there's a lot of things that want to kill the tree. There's a lot of there's weeds that might want to grow inside of that shelter. And so it really pays to be on it in terms of your aftercare. Make sure that it gets on someone's schedule to do, and that you just make it happen in a timely fashion. And if you do that, then you're going to have much higher success rates than if you don't do your aftercare well. And that's going to save you a lot of money. So here are some methods that we have used in tree establishment, and we've been working on different methods here for the last 3 years or so, and we try to keep improving what we're doing, and being able to get higher success rates at lower costs. That's our goal. But currently, this is the main method that we use. So we use for larger livestock like cattle, we're using a 6-foot tall Plantra tree shelter. So Plantra is the brand that makes these. There's a fiberglass stake on the inside. And then we protect it with a single strand of poly wire. Make sure it's hot, and the livestock will generally respect it. So it's a pretty simple system. That's what we use to protect the tree. We'll have a vole guard or just right around the tree, and that's like a spiral vinyl wrap that goes right around the tree and protects from above ground girdling. So this is the most proven protection method that we have right now. It does cost, let's say, about $10 per shelter. So if we're talking dollars and cents, this is the shelter is almost always more expensive than the tree, which is, it's all right. We can do that in certain circumstances. In other circumstances, that might not be feasible. And we can talk a little bit about that in a bit. If we're talking about budget, installations of Silvopasture, this is about as cheap as it can get. So this is a live stake of that's Willow. It's a hybrid Willow. We just planted that this spring. That is probably 15 feet tall, or the live stake itself is 15 feet tall, and then it's probably 2 feet in the ground, maybe 3 feet in the ground if we were able to get that deep. We produce some of these. We're not producing near as many as we would like to be able to, but this is something that people can do on their own. You can grow these on your own and have propagation material for free. If anyone doesn't know, you can take cuttings, poles off of willows, poplars, and a number of other species, and just jam them in the ground in an appropriate place that has enough soil moisture, and it will root and it will give you a whole new tree. So this is a quick way to get shade in a pasture. It's really nice to finish a project and look out and you see these 12 to 15 foot poles sticking out of the ground that are going to be providing shade in just a year or two. So it's able to keep material costs way down. If you grow it yourself, all the material costs that you have in this is like the $1 that you spend on this little black wrap. And that's pretty handy to keep livestock off. So this is a very easy place to start. It's a very cheap place to start. It allows you to get started with very inexpensive and forgiving trees so that you can get some experience with those trees that are cheaper and easier to work with. And then once you've got some experience with those, then you can move on and do honey locusts and persimmons and other trees that are more expensive and maybe a little bit more difficult to work with. And then, so I've shared a little bit here about the methods that we use, but those methods are used in a certain context. So in Pennsylvania, we have, like I said, we don't have any cost share through NRCS, but we have been able to find cost share through water quality related funding sources. And so where we have been able to find funding, we've been able to build out a pretty good budget for each of our projects. But if you are constrained, if you're really constrained by your budget, you'll want to think very critically about what methods you will use. So if you've only got, let's say, a budget of $8 a tree, then using methods that will cost you $30 or $40 a tree might not work. If you're doing a timber planting, especially if it's like a low value timber rather than like a veneer log, but if you're doing a low cost timber planting, then you can't really afford to put a $10 tree shelter with the cost of the labor on top of that around each tree. It just doesn't make sense. The ROI is not there. On the other hand, if you're putting a $40 grafted tree in, you can't afford to lose that tree. And so the $10 investment in the tree shelter is probably a wise investment so that that tree is well taken care of. If you're doing a browse planting where you want a really high density of trees, forget the shelters, forget everything that I just showed you. If you want to do browse, you'll want to plant your trees really, really close, and it doesn't make sense to put shelters on them because it would just be astronomical, the cost of it. If you're doing a low density planting, which is often what we're doing, low density, we're generally in the let's say the 20 to 60 trees per acre, maybe 20 to 80 trees per acre density is typically where we're at. So more protection is then justified, the fewer trees that you have. So just keep that in mind, that depending on what your goals are and the resources that you have available, you will have to change up your methods a little bit. Don't just copy and paste what we do, regardless of your context. You really want your context to drive the methods that you use. So I think we'll wrap up here, what at least the initial presentation, and then we'll have our Q&A after this. And so at Trees for Graziers, what we do is we walk farmers through the whole process of establishing trees in their pastures. We try to make it as easy as possible for someone to say yes to silvopasture. So we do everything from planning and acquiring funding, and also acquiring the right nursery and tree stock. We will do the planting and we will do the aftercare. So everything from the very beginning of the project through the, once the trees are mature enough to be on their own, we will do take care of that whole process for people, because we realize that most people don't have the knowledge set or the time or the money to be able to do it themselves. So we come through and help with each one of those steps. And if you want to learn more, we have a lot of resources at treesforgraziers.com. You can buy tree shelters. And if you are interested in consulting and assistance from us, there's a way to sign up for that. And those forms are on the website. And with that, I think I will wrap it up and we'll move over to Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was just great. I just want to quick reminder to those on the other side of this. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and not in the chat. I think one just popped up and I was going to copy and paste it over, but as a host, I actually don't have that capability. So if you don't mind putting that into the Q&A, and then we will get to it later. So that was great. Thank you so much. Very practical and straightforward. And I think it's so important to focus on goals and context. So I love that that is where we started. All right, so we are going to do our fun quickfire questions, and then we'll move into that first round of questions that we collected before the webinar started. So, all right, Austin, these don't have to be exhaustive responses. They can be quick and dirty. Some of these have to do with work and some of them don't at all. So we'll start off with, what is your favorite farm tool?
My favorite farm tool. You know what? It's a new one that we designed it. It's not
no big deal.
It's not super fancy. It's a dibble bar. Ooh. That has just a length of rebar attached to it. It's like 24 inches of rebar. And then, so a dibble bar is usually used for planting bare root trees. You're just opening up the soil, popping the bare root tree, and then closing it again. But this dibble bar that we created has just a length of rebar on it. And we open up the soil just enough to put a long live stake in. So I'm really excited about doing more and more with live stakes because they're so easy to use. They're so cheap, and they plant really fast too. And their establishment and success rate is really high. So with these dibble bars, we can get these live stakes in the ground really solid, with a lot less work. And because we're not like digging up a hole, like a 2-foot hole, they're solid in there. So that's my favorite new tool, and it's only possible because we now have someone on our team who's a welder.
Oh, that's great.
I'll make them at home, which is great.
If there are any young people out there, we need more tradesfolk. All right. Least favorite farm tool.
Least favorite farm tool. Oh boy, I am not a trades person at all. I'm not a So I prefer to not have to. I don't like working on machines. I like when machines work, but I really don't like when machines don't work. So anything that's broken, let's go with that. Anything that's
Okay.
broken, I'm not a fan.
Okay. Favorite place you've ever been on vacation?
Oh, let's say Belize. I got really into spearfishing when I was in Belize. That was a highlight.
Very cool. That sounds amazing.
It was beautiful.
Is there a tree or livestock species that you just can't stand?
Let's see, what trees can I not stand? There's not a whole lot. Oh, Zelkova. For whatever reason, and a lot of people might not know what a Zelkova is.
I do not know.
Yeah, it's a weird ornamental tree that they plant. It seems that they plant them a lot around gas stations for whatever reason. At least that's where I see them pop up all the time. It is a really weird and seemingly useless tree from my observation, but I also really in general just don't like ornamental stupid trees. I like productive hardworking trees.
There you go. That's fair. All right. And then last song that was stuck in your head.
Last song that was stuck in my head, probably something from Mumford and Sons.
I'm amazed at how much this stumps people.
Yeah.
I feel like there's always a sound, like a relentless soundtrack in my head. Okay. All right. We're gonna move into real questions now.
Okay.
So we've batched these up because they were kind of all over the place. So the first section is like planning, design, infrastructure, that kind of stuff. So someone says, what is the absolute cheapest silvopasture I can plant into an existing pasture in the mid-Atlantic? Trees, tubing, protection, etc.
I'd say it's those willows and poplars. Willows and poplars. If you can start your own and you give yourself a couple of years for that to get up to size, but you can do it. So you can do it for free, right? I would. In most cases, you probably want to invest a little bit in protection, but those wraps that I showed, they're $1. Plantra sells them. It's you can't get a whole lot cheaper than that.
And are you in your mind when we're planting this imaginary cheapest silvopasture, is this like stakes, like taller stakes or rods or?
Yep. If you, I would either do it as like a 10-foot live stake, like a pretty, like a pole, let's call it a pole. That's like an inch or two in diameter, really good size. And those will have a little bit more size, and you can integrate livestock a little bit sooner. You could also do something that's more like a whip. So something that has a smaller diameter, it's a 1-year growth, but willows and poplars, you can still get 8, maybe even 10 feet on a 1-year growth.
Yeah, it's incredible.
They're just going to be smaller in diameter. You want to protect them a little bit longer, but it's going to be cheaper, or you're going to be able to get them faster. So either one, they're both really good options. Nice thing is that they're above browse height right away. They're above competition. So we put in 1,600 of them on Monday and Tuesday. On this one, we're expanding our nursery.
Awesome.
And it's beautiful to walk away from it, and everything's like 6 feet out of the ground, and there's like thick reed canary grass that grows up 3 feet tall. It's not gonna outcompete the trees for sunlight.
Awesome. All right. Can silvopasture be created effectively on smaller plots or areas of land? And if so, what might be the smallest area on which silvopasture can be practiced? Thanks.
Totally, absolutely. Let's see, what's the smallest area? There's like, they make these dwarf mulberries, and we could go down to bonsai. Now that would be cool. Little bonsai mulberry. But they make these
with
like
a worm farm underneath.
That would be great. That would be fantastic. I mean, you could do this on a postage stamp backyard. One of the ideas that has seemed really interesting to me lately on like how to scale this down to a homestead scale is poultry silvopasture. I'm really into poultry silvopasture. I think there's a ton of potential here that just needs to be run with. And I would like to see people be able to do this in their backyards, have like a couple mulberry trees, and then maybe a couple persimmon trees, whatever is the right fit for your context. And you can do that on like a half-acre backyard or smaller, and then mulberry trees, and you just run broilers underneath the mulberries when the mulberries are dropping, and then you take the broilers out, and you have like a nice little, like a 2 to 3 month silvopasture in your backyard where you're eating mulberries, your chickens are eating mulberries, and then you're eating like mulberry chickens. It's great.
Everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Are you doing any work with food production trees in silvopasture system? If so, we'd love to hear about it. What are the advantages and challenges?
Great question. And generally, I try to avoid food producing trees. So in general, I'd say there's 2 paths to go when you look at establishing trees in a silvopasture. One is to focus on trees that are there specifically to support your livestock, and that's what we focus on. And then the other path is trees that are there to bring additional income streams, and generally a lot of that is human food. You get into timber as well, but generally what our focus is on trees that are there to support livestock, and that's for a couple reasons. The scalability of that is just so much larger than, let's say, chestnuts. I like chestnuts, but silvopasture needs to be applied at the scale of tens of millions of acres, and we're not going to do that with chestnuts. It's a simple thing of it. I'm focused on what can we do that is really scalable at a large, all across the landscape. It's a lot easier to do trees that are there just for your livestock and livestock feed, because with food crops, you have to think about the harvesting, the processing, and the marketing. There's a lot more complexity to it, a lot more costs associated with it. There is more financial upside if you do really well with, let's say, chestnuts or hazelnuts or whatever it is. But again, that scale is really in the favor of silvopasture that's there primarily for livestock. It's just much easier to deal with. And for us as a company, we've decided we only have so much bandwidth. There are others like the Savannah Institute that are working on tree crops for human consumption, and we'll let them run with it. And we will focus more of our energies on feed crops, feed trees, honey locust, persimmons, mulberries, and then other trees that are primarily there for shade.
Nice. And I will just say, because because my boss, the lovely and talented Katie Commender, is here tonight, and we just took a Food Safety and Modernization Act class, FSMA. I can just hear her going, FSMA, FSMA. If you are making more than $25,000 a year, according to FSMA, you cannot have grazing animals in with your food crops for the 120 days before harvest. So it really narrows the timeline that you're allowed to have animals in that space, because having animals grazing there constitutes raw manure. So that's just something to be very aware of in your design phase.
Yep, absolutely. What I really like is the marketing. Here's the marketing plan for honey locust pods. Is the pods drop, the cows eat them, and then you sell the cow. Sell the beef that you were already going to sell, right? So there's no additional work, no additional red tape, there's no FSMA, nothing like that involved with feed crops.
Yep, that's a good point. All right, so we're thinking about goats in silvopasture and worried about bark stripping down the road when it's time to remove the tubes. How do you cheaply protect trees from goats in the long term?
Yeah, so here's where a limitation comes in, where we've only been at it for 3 years. And there's just not a whole lot of silvopasture sites out there that are significantly older. So on the one hand, I would say I don't know for sure. In the limited experience we've had, I will say that maybe the most vulnerable is when trees are like they're in the shelter and then you take the shelter off, because the shelter they're not quite as hardened off when they're in that shelter. So when it comes time to take that shelter off, what we're doing now is we're not just taking it whole and then taking it off right away. What we'll do is we'll slice it sliced in such a way that we can reuse it later. But then we are keeping it on, but it's cut open and it's allowed to expand a little bit, and so that it does provide some protection to the tree while the bark is able to harden off. So that's useful for goats. We've seen cattle strip new fresh bark. Deer will do it as well, and they'll rub, obviously. And if you have long-term problems with goats stripping the bark, there are pretty simple, wire cages and that kind of thing that you can put right around the bark would be an option.
Gotcha. All right. And have you had any luck transplanting trees from existing forests? I have some scrubby areas full of young seedlings, and I wonder about moving them out to pasture. What about planting trees from seed? How would you, well, here, let's answer the first one. This is a two-part question. So moving trees into pasture.
We haven't done it ourselves at any commercial scale. I can't say I've really done it myself, even on a personal backyard scale, but totally it works. Certain species are easier than other ones to transplant. Certain ones have more of a taproot, or just they take a really long time to recover from a transplant. So it's going to be species by species, but totally you can definitely do that. And it's a nice low cost way to get locally adapted genetics for your site. So I'd say try it on a small scale, see how it works for you. And then just be thoughtful about when you're transplanting. Make sure to transplant during the dormant season.
Nice. Okay, what about planting trees from seed? How would you go about planting a whole silvopasture from seed?
And I'm assuming the question is direct seeding in the ground.
I believe that's where we're headed here.
Yeah. Really depends on what kind of trees we're talking about. I would really divide it up into like large seeded stuff and smaller seeded stuff. Yeah, if you're looking at browse species, it's a whole other ball game compared to like let's say 20 trees per acre. If you're doing browse, you're looking at like multiple thousands per acre versus 20 trees per acre. There's some really interesting stuff in Australia that they're, I forget offhand if it's Lucana or if it's something else that they're using for intensive high density browse systems, but it's super high density. It's kind of monocultures too, which, whatever. But it's really interesting what they're doing. And that's all direct seeded is my understanding. And then that's very different from like doing walnuts or something like that. And I would like to do a whole lot more of those large seeded things, walnuts, hickories, in a silvopasture and direct seeding those, because of the issue with them, the difficulty of transplanting their taproot. So I would love to get away from having to buy nursery stock and transplant that for those large seeded trees with the taproot. And I would love to go for more towards direct seeding them in pastures. And my understanding is that you can put stuff around them that's going to deter rodents from digging them up and eating them in your pasture. So I would definitely, we haven't done it yet. So I can't say what exactly works and what doesn't work. But I would want to think about deterring rodents and other animals from digging those nuts up when you have them out in your pasture.
Yeah, and it makes me think about what you were saying in your presentation about management. It's like getting the tree in is the easy part. Like getting the seed in is the easy part. It's, that keeping it alive that first year in particular is the tough stuff. So definitely I can see how that could be touch and go with that nice tender young growth. Okay, so all right, some species and sourcing question. I guess this is kind of species. Do you use mycorrhizal inoculant? Well, okay, this has a couple questions, so let's start with that.
Yes, we do. Yep, we'll use like a root dip when we put our bare root trees in the ground.
And in general, what kind of site prep do you think of as having the most bang for your buck when you're planting out of silvopasture into pasture? Do you focus more on soil or vegetation?
It really depends on the context, right? So are we planting a high density browse row? Then we want to maybe till the soil and put in a cover crop first, and then terminate the cover crop, and then put your let's say willow live stakes right into that. If we're doing a high density browse willow row, for example. If we're looking at individual trees, we're usually not doing a whole lot of site prep. We're usually just we're making sure that the site is mowed, and then we're using shovels or auger or whatever to excavate the hole for that tree. And that's about it in terms of our site prep.
Okay. What are your favorite willow varieties for silvopasture? It seems hybrid grows the fastest, but is there a more palatable or digestible variety I should look into? And what about poplar too? A willow
Great
poplar fan.
question.
Yeah.
Great question. I'm not an expert on the palatability of different willows compared to each other. So the one that we use commonly is a hybrid willow called Austri. And the reason that we use it is because it grows fast. It grows tall, it grows fast. It's a fast growing shade tree that's very useful in wet to moderate soils. It's not intended to be a long-term tree. You want to manage its size, and you probably want to have it for 10 years or maybe less, unless you're pollarding it regularly. And then same with poplars is, again, those are not intended to be our long-term trees, but we do a lot of both willows and poplars for fast shade. Willows, typically the way that I think about it is willows are more for browse, and poplars. So I want these willows and poplars are both for fast shade, but then poplars we're going to manage more for timber. It's not super high value timber, but it's timber. And then willows we're going to manage more for fodder in the long term, pollarding, using them for fodder, because willows will tend to produce more mass of fodder than poplars tend to. Even though poplars can be eaten in larger quantities, the poplar leaves can be eaten in larger quantities. And for other willows, we've used there's a biomass willow. It's a hybrid. I believe it's called SX61. Is one that we've used. There's so many different willows out there, and any of the hybrids that have been developed for biomass could be interesting because they are just super fast growing and very, very vigorous. But then on our riparian buffer projects, we use native willows, black willow, pussy willow, peach leaf willow, are different ones that we use.
Nice. Okay, let me jump down a couple of questions because this is another willow question. We'll piggyback it here. How deep are you planting those poles, like when you're doing the big poles? And well, and what do you use to get them in the ground? But we now know that it's your new dibbler.
Yep, less deep than most people anticipate would be needed, is the short answer. So on those really tall poles, we're going typically as far as the auger will allow us. That's like 2.5 feet, I think. I will say I've pushed the limits of this. I've taken 20-foot tall live stakes and to see, can we get a 20-foot live stake to take? And I planted that here in my nursery. And because I hit rock, I was only able to go, it was probably not even 24 inches. It was probably anywhere between 18 and 24 inches. So I had a 20-foot live stake sticking out 18 feet. Now I picked my site well. It was nice and low and plenty wet. But I took 3 of those big 20-foot live stakes and all of them succeeded, even though they were only 2 feet deep max. Willows and poplars really only need a little bit underneath the soil to root. So long as the soil is moist, they will root perfectly fine. The rest is for anchoring. So the deeper that you can get, the more well anchored and solid that tree is going to be. But some people will tell you that you need to have 2/3 of the live stake under the ground for it to work. And that's baloney. You can do with a whole lot less. You just need to make sure that it is well anchored, and you need to pick your site correctly. And if you want to get it established on a site that's marginal, maybe a little bit too dry, use a lot of mulch, and that'll go a long ways. So, and the tools for a really big live stake, like let's say a 2-inch live stake, we'll use an auger then, rather than this dibble. The dibble bar works really well for smaller stuff that's maybe the size of your finger. But for a larger stock, we want to use an auger, and the less soil that you can disturb, the better. So rather than disturbing like a 6 or 12-inch hole, because that creates more soil that is loose and the tree is going to wiggle around in that hole more. If you have a 2-inch pole and you can make a 2.5-inch hole, that's perfect, because then it's not going to wiggle around.
Yeah. Not anecdotally, because it's something I did. I've done that, not like in between size, bigger than a finger, not 2.5 inches, but I've done some like mid-size poles, and this would not work at scale. But if you just have a few and you want to experiment with just a T-post pounder and then a T-post puller just to make that hole, and that usually works pretty well. There's still some kind of roughing them up to get them in there. All right, so we are right on the dot here. And time-wise, we're just ticking right along. So, we do have this one last question. Some of it's a little off topic, so we're not going to hit this whole thing, but I am going to read the whole thing for context, and then we're just going to answer the end of it. So this is a question about neglected creek bottom lands. This person has 40 plus acres of fallow creek bottom that has a slight contour in the middle, middle of East Tennessee, covered in pioneer species, privet, bramble, really thick muscadine vines, couple of stands of large loblolly and oak, poplar, etc. They've hand cleared about 15 acres, which I'm impressed. That's a lot of hand clearing. And there's existing 7-acre field that has been hayed over the last 15 years. So it's after all that, we plan on intensive rotational grazing of cows and sheep ASAP. What is the best design or clearing plan to move us toward forage while long-term planning for proper silvopasture? So they're trying to kind of move this towards silvopasture and away from just scrubby random wood.
Great question. I'm not the best person for that. Like I said, we focus mostly on planting trees in open pastures. The area that we're in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Land here is like $30,000 to $50,000 an acre. So it does not sit idle and get scrubby. It is open, it is maximized, and super, like, it's pushed. I would refer people to, there's the book Silvopasture by Steve Gabriel, and he talks more about the process of thinning and converting woods to a silvopasture. That's a really good resource. Greg Judy also has really good stuff on YouTube, and that's more of what he does, as well as he will do a lot of conversions of woods to silvopasture. So those are two resources that are going to be better than me at answering that question.
And also, folks, if you haven't checked it out, your local agents are always happy to come visit you and talk about this stuff. Your county foresters, they get paid to, you pay their salary, so you may as well invite them out to help you. And they'll come talk to you about how to take on those projects too. So that can be a good resource. All right, so let's see. All right, folks, this is a good time to start populating the chat with some questions. If you haven't already, I haven't pulled it up yet, but I will in a minute. So while you're throwing questions in there,
Q&A box, right? Populate
yes.
Q&A box with
Thanks.
questions.
Did I say chat?
You said chat. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
You got me. All right. So quickfire round 2.
Cool.
Do you have any secret talents?
Secret talents. I can speak Dutch.
Oh, prove it.
Fluently. Ik kan Nederlands spreken. Ik groeide op in België. Vanaf mijn 7e jaar tot mijn 18e. En toen kwam ik terug naar de VS om te wonen.
And do we have any translators in the audience? Would you care to share?
Just have to take my word for it.
Oh, okay. All right. I could have turned the captions on to translate for me if I had been prepared.
Someone
Let's
may
hike
have gotten a translated version of that. That would be great.
it. All right. If you were, this was a fun one with Sean, so I wanted to re-ask it. If you were going to be reincarnated as an animal, which one?
I want to be reincarnated as a pig in my future ideal dream silvopasture
Silvopasture.
system. Yes.
That's awesome.
Because ideally, a pig that gets to, enjoy multiple seasons of life, multiple years of life. So I get to enjoy mulberries in the summer and persimmons in the fall, and I get to munch on walnuts and hickories and hazelnuts and all those things during winter and all that good stuff. So that is my goal, and my goal is to give a lot of hogs a beautiful, beautiful life like that in the coming decades. Many, many, many beautiful days and weeks and months, and just one short bad day, right?
Heck yeah, that's the move.
Yep.
Awesome. Speaking of food, what is the weirdest thing you've ever eaten?
Oh boy.
You can tell us in Dutch if it's embarrassing.
Well, it was in Belgium. Head cheese. I was
Okay.
So this is how great of friends that I have. So we came back from. I was born in the States, grew up in Belgium for a number of years. Growing up, and we were invited to someone's house when we came back from a trip to the US. We hadn't been to Belgium for a while, and so they wanted to welcome us back, and as part of that, we got blindfolded and we were given certain things to eat. Some of them were great, like fries, and Belgians make fantastic fries, but another one was head cheese, and I was not. That was the first and only time I've ever had head cheese.
Well, I encourage you to try it again. It can be very good.
Okay. I'll swing by your place sometime,
Okay.
and we can snack on head cheese.
Okay. I have some in the freezer.
Great. Great.
From our hogs.
Maybe
Okay.
I won't swing by your place.
Okay. And what do you wish you'd known when you got started in agroforestry?
Oh man, there's so many things. That's why I wrote the book.
That's a perfect plug. I did not set that up, folks.
Thank you very much. I will pay you later for that.
Okay.
But really, that is why I wrote the book, The Grazier's Guide to Trees, was so that there's so many things. It's a steep learning curve, right? And a pretty expensive learning curve as well, when there's a lot of mortality and a lot of just trial and error in those first years. So I put together a book last year, and it really is based off of like 2 years of experience. But we learned a lot in 2 years, and the goal then is to be able to like do a revision of the book. Actually, I have a SARE grant now, and in that SARE grant, there is funding for me to do a revision of the book. So I'll probably do that in about 2-3 years towards the end of the grant. So I have some time to collect as much information as I can and redo it with an update based on the intervening 3 years or whatever of knowledge and experience that we've gained by then. Nice.
So interlaced comments. Hey, interlaced comments, grant partners and buddies. Woo -woo. How do you establish browse without tree tubes?
So if I was doing a browse establishment without tree tubes.
Let me stop you for 1 second, because we referred to browse a couple times. Will you just define that for folks in case anyone's a little lost?
Yeah, so I would, in a silvopasture setting, I would say we're looking at leaf fodder there. So browse, getting fodder from trees. And there's 2 ways of getting browse leaf fodder in a silvopasture setting. One would be through a pollard, where you have a tree that's above browse height, and then you're coming in and then you're lopping branches off, and then you're dropping them for your livestock. The beautiful thing about that is you control when the livestock have access and when they don't. The other one is through coppicing. So you're regularly cutting your trees back down to the ground, letting them resprout, and then you can allow your livestock onto those shrubs or trees, and you don't have to drop everything for them. That's much easier to mechanize, and I think it'll be much easier to scale. So the way that we would do it is I would want to do my site prep really well first, right? Because competition with forages is something that's going to be a major concern when you're planting that densely, and you can't protect them individually. And then I would just use polywire, portable electric fencing to protect the browse rows while they're getting established. So if you're someone who's rotational grazing anyway, then just keeping polywire between your livestock and the browse rows when you don't want them on it, and then when you want them to have access to the browse, you just move the polywire over to the other side so that they have access to browse those rows. That's how I would do it. That doesn't protect it from deer or other wildlife that has access 365 days out of the year. But then you'll probably just look at planting a really high density and expecting to get some loss. Or you could protect it with electric fencing year round. But in most cases, I'd probably just plant a high density and expect some deer loss.
And Steve Gabriel has a SARE grant that he hasn't started implementing yet, but he is doing a high density fodder planting. So we'll at least have some data because I talked to him recently, he's got a few different blocks, a few different methods to compare and contrast of different species too. So yeah, that's something we get questions about a lot. And there's just not good data in the US. You kind of have to look to New Zealand and to Europe are the two places that seem to have a lot.
Yep. And so the question about the willow varieties, there's a lot more data on that from New Zealand. In New Zealand, they've done trials, they've done research on what are the tannin levels of these different willows. Based on that, you might prefer one willow over another, and what are livestock preferences for one willow over another. So that research has been done over in New Zealand a lot more, but a lot of the varieties that they have, to my knowledge, are not available here in the United States.
All right, we're gonna keep moving. So this is very much on topic. Bradford asks, any resources on coppicing protein or nutrition per species? And we've got a few good answers. One is, I see here we have Steve Gabriel of Wellspring Forest Farms, SARE grant. And then Interlace Commons is producing a technical manual on the subject of tree fodder and tree hay, which I know that we're all very, very excited about. Sure, it says short answer, protein is only one piece of the puzzle in terms of animal nutrition. There are some tables in the Mark Project's book, Coppice Agroforestry, that talk about palatability and digestibility. What do you have to add to that?
Not much. If someone wants information on this, I refer them elsewhere. I do have, so Steve Gabriel's SARE funded research into this. That's what I would refer people to really well. It's pretty easy to understand the way that he lays it out. I have that referenced in my book. So I have like the printouts of the results from his research in the back of my book as an appendix item. So if anyone has that book, they can access that really quick. But there's not a whole lot of other resources that I'm aware of in English. There is one in Dutch, but most people can't use that. And I'm excited to see more and more resources about that because it'd be very, very useful.
Excellent. And if Stesh, if you want to Google Steve Gabriel SARE grant and find that link, that'd probably be helpful just to throw it out to people. Okay, Erica asks, Austin, you mentioned that you probably wouldn't want a planting of 100% willow and poplar, and I was just curious, why not?
So I see well, It depends on what your goals are. It depends on what your context is. If you're on a really wet site, you might only be able to grow willows. But in general, I see those species as our fast growing trees. And then we integrate a lot more of our longer term species in as well. So our longer term species, we're typically looking at honey locust, persimmons. We'll look at other trees like mulberries if we're looking at hogs and poultry, timber trees, and just whatever is the fitting for the goals. And willows and poplars can be used as the primary species, and that's how they do it in New Zealand, to my understanding. The things that I've seen come out of New Zealand are very intensive, very focused on willows and poplars. And in the lowlands of Europe, so Belgium, the Netherlands, they also do a lot with willows and poplars more than anything else. So it can be the focus, but I think we have access to other trees that have other benefits, like stockpiled feed in the form of honey locust pods, high energy feed late in the season. Persimmons are one of those examples that are very useful. And so we haven't ever done a project that's solely willows and poplars for that reason, because we have access to other trees that have a lot of value that they bring to the table.
Yeah, and then there's a comment from Fran just nodding to, just the positive effects of diversity in general as well. All right, so we've got a question. We need to unpack what is a live stake, and also the stake, pole, rod, and whip.
Yeah. So a live stake is, let's see, it's a branch of a tree that you can, and it refers to the branches of species that will root if you put a branch in the ground. So a willow is one where you put it in the ground and it will set roots, and then it'll leaf out. So you'll get a new tree. So like copy and pasting a new tree. It's great. I wish it worked for every tree species, but it doesn't. Mostly willows, poplars, dogwoods, elderberries. Yeah, there's a number of other ones, but it's a limited number of trees that it works with. And then the terminology of poles, the pole, I would say that's about like something like this. Think of like a small fence post or something like that size. A whip, you're looking at something that's fairly long, but narrow. So a small diameter, mostly a first year growth. I forget what the other one was.
Stake, and also I said rod because that one is thrown out a lot too.
Yeah, a rod would be similar to a whip in my mind. From my understanding, people use them a little bit loosely. I'm sure there are circles where there's more standard definitions than how I use them.
Yeah. Yep. Size classifications, and definitely when you're purchasing these, make sure to look at what those are, because it's not standardized.
Yeah.
Okay, are food trees that much more expensive than livestock focused trees?
It depends. It really depends on what are you buying, a seedling? Are you buying a grafted tree? If you're talking let's say a fruit tree like an apple or a pear, you're usually talking about a grafted tree, but there are whole huge industries that produce millions of those a year. So the price is a little bit higher, but it's also super competitive because there's a million of those being produced every year. Whereas a honey locust, like there's the only places that offer like grafted honey locust for sale right now, you have to drop like $40 and then another $30 in shipping to get it. So, but that's a grafted tree. So the breakdown would be more along the lines of seedling versus grafted. And then there's even like the conservation grade seedlings. And then there's very select seedlings as well. And then grafted trees, and then the size of it makes a big difference too. But I wouldn't say that there's a huge difference between general livestock feed trees and food trees. Both can be produced expensively or inexpensively.
Excellent. Steve asked from New Hampshire, any particularly good fit for trees for goat fodder?
Let's see, trees for goat fodder, willows and poplars are two really great ones. Goats will eat basically anything that's out there. So if you have woods, if you have scrubby areas, those are great places to go. Steve Gabriel talks about in his book Silvopasture how the scrubby areas on his farm were what allowed him to get through some really harsh droughts in very good condition, because his sheep, his Katahdins, were able to eat like buckthorn and I forget if he says honeysuckle or what other species he's used on his farm. But all this scrubby stuff that most people would say is worthless or junk, or you want to get rid of it, has come in really, really handy in drought conditions.
Nice. Hang on. I lost my Q&A. There we go. And then, oh, also I will plug, there's like most Facebook groups I just can't even stomach, but there's a really great one called Tree Hay that is particularly about the practice of creating tree hay, but because there's a lot of goat folks on there, there's a lot of good information about this stuff, and it's a fairly friendly group. So while we're waiting for Interlace to come out with the tree hay book, you can visit that very friendly and supportive Facebook group. And Steve says, same person, I've strongly considered thorny beasts like hardy orange, hawthorn, gumi, etc. Is that, maybe that's in reference to feeding the goats, I'm not sure. Interlace asks, what's the market for poplar timber?
That's a great question. My understanding is it's useful for on-farm stuff. And then it's going to depend on what area you're in, what the market is. Actually, Propagate Ventures had, I forget the name of the website, but they had a website where they did a whole bunch of different articles, and they had a good series on the market for poplars, or the value of growing hybrid poplars. And then one of the articles, I believe, was on where is it profitable to grow poplars for timber. And they highlighted that if you're in an area where there's a lot of hardwoods, and Pennsylvania would be one of those, it's probably not super profitable. But if you're in an area where there's not a lot of hardwoods, but you need some kind of wood, I think they were looking at Argentina, there it is profitable. In my context, if the trees are primarily there for shade, that is, they are serving their value. We're getting our value out of them because they're providing shade and reducing heat stress on livestock. And then anything that we get from the timber sale of it is just bonus. I'm not planting poplar trees for timber with that end in mind, with that as my primary focus, but they're primarily a shade tree. And that's how I'm going to get my money out of them. And any extra income from timber sales is gravy.
And Radford commented that they just had a survey done on it, I assume at their space, and says worth it. So
cool.
There's some support. Okay, and they have rephrased the question from the beginning. Using Austin in a consulting role as a percentage of total project cost, does the funding reimbursement offset his cost to break even, or is the farmer cost still more than the funding?
It depends. Depends on where you are and what kind of cost share resources are available. In Pennsylvania, there is no NRCS funding, but there is a thing called the Farm Vitality Grant, which can pay for 75% of the consulting and consulting fees for a farm project like this. And then we, as part of that, then we'll go after implementation money and try to find something that is a good fit for that farm. It depends on the size. Like, is it a 2-acre project? Is it a 200-acre project? Huge difference, right? Are you in an area where you're getting $30 per tree, or where you can get $100 per acre? again, huge difference in the cost, the scope of the project. And also, for better or worse, I don't do much consulting anymore, hardly at all. But we have a team. That's why we have a team. So we don't list it on our website yet. We need to get back to our website and do some more work on that. But we have a team of 6 people right now, 6 people full-time.
Awesome.
And we have consultants on our team, and that would be glad to help folks. And if people are interested in getting more services, consulting services, we do have a process that the website can walk you through. The first thing that we ask/require of everyone is that they read the Grazier's Guide to Trees. And that's a really inexpensive way. It's a whole lot less expensive than the consulting rate. But it will give you a good first overview into Silvopasture. And then we can jump right into like application questions about how what is in the book applies specifically to your farm. And if you read the book and you said, I'm good, I have all I need, great. And then we'll just run with it, and we'll bless you on just going for it. But then if you want more assistance, we're available.
Nice. All right, last question here before we wrap up. At least last crowd question, and this is actually a follow-up that Erica meant to put in the chat, but I think it's still valid. It says, I was thinking of planting only willow and poplar and brush mowing them every year. And she said, whoops, sorry, I meant to put that in the chat. Just responding to Austin's comments about willow and poplar plantings. I love the idea of incorporating mulberry, honey locust, persimmon, etc. But then I wouldn't be able to easily mechanically coppice the whole planting down to the ground each year. And I'm going to turn this into a question, because you've talked about putting using them as like temporary trees in these diversified plantings. And I was just curious, you talked a little bit about coming back and pollarding, but in general, what is the maintenance plan on those long term? Are they to stay and to be fodder, or are they to just get mowed and grazed until they die back naturally?
Yeah, for the most part, we're putting in trees that are there for fast shade, and then we're going to pollard them.
Okay.
Now, again, we're only 3 years into it, and we're not yet at the phase where the farmers that we're working with are then going to manage. So some of them might say, hey, I want to just get rid of those trees altogether, and then we cut them down, and whatever gets browsed,
and sell them for poles to your other clients.
There we go. Yep. Or they can, if they decide we want to pollard them year over year, great. But we're not yet at that point. If you want to mechanically coppice, I wouldn't go with poplars, because poplars are more of a larger tree. And I also wouldn't go with like an Austrian willow, because those are like 80-foot tall trees. I would go with a shrubby willow, maybe something that's been developed for biomass, although you might want something like biomass stuff will put on a lot of size in the pole, which is going to be harder to coppice. You might want something that has a narrower, a finer wood part, stem, and a lot of leaf matter. So I would go with more shrubby species. Willows are interesting. Mulberries are also really interesting, high in protein, very digestible. False indigo bush is one that I'm very interested in. There is at least one guy in Missouri who's been experimenting with it, and he's had really good results. He's told me that his sheep don't eat it in the spring and the fall, but then they really eat it during the summer, which is perfect. Like that's exactly when you want them to be eating those leaf fodders. So that's an interesting one that we want to experiment more with. It's also high in tannins, which can be really good if you have a lot of fescue. Same with willows. Like if you have a lot of fescue, you want browse species that are high in tannins, because then the tannins can neutralize the alkaloids in the fescue and likely make the fescue more palatable and reduce the negative effects of them. So if you're in the fescue belt, I would take a really close look at browse species that are high in tannins. Now, I wouldn't do, so honey locust, persimmons, and other trees like that, those we're talking like standard trees. So big, tall trees, we're not going to coppice those. Those trees are there for late season fruit pods that are dropping to the ground and then are being eaten by livestock. So two ways of managing. So the willows and mulberries and false indigo, the ones that I mentioned, those ones are good candidates for regular coppicing and browse. But then your other trees are you want to manage as taller trees for shade and pods and fruit.
I just realized that I missed a question. It's something you said made me think of it. From earlier, we're at 8:30. Are you okay can we go about 5-10 minutes longer? Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you. I've heard that honey locusts will go back to being spiny if they're browsed. Thornless honey locusts. Can you talk about this? Do I have to worry about even pruning mine up to above browse height? Does that count as browsing to a tree?
So I've seen different reports as well. My experience does not back that up. So from my experience, what I've seen, I believe that thorniness is more of a genetic trait than a cultural thing. A cultural thing would be if it's browsed, if it's cut, then it will throw thorns. My experience is it's more of a genetic thing. So I've seen, like, we plant a lot of honey locusts, and we're involved in growing them as a nursery. We've had certain seed batches that have had, let's say, 2% thorns, like 2% of the seedlings have developed thorns. And then we've had other seed batches where 80% of them developed thorns. And I don't think they weren't managed significantly different. They were from the same nursery. It was just different years of those batches. So that to me says it is most likely a genetic thing more than a cultural thing. So I would not be too concerned about pruning up trees. I encourage people to prune up the trees so that they have a smaller canopy and the canopy is higher up on the tree. And that should work for honey locusts. Again, we don't have a ton of wild honey locusts in pastures here in this area, so we're not working with them as intimately as in some parts of the country. I will say also that we are working on developing better genetics of honey locusts, particularly looking towards completely thornless trees and trees that have higher yields, having those two in one, having trees that are all female, high yielding with a lot of sugar in their pods and completely thornless. So that's our goal. It won't be this year. It's a long-term propagation thing, but that is in the works.
Yeah, we're on tree time.
Yes, indeed. Embrace the pace.
Yep, embrace the pace. I love that. I'm gonna steal it, but credit you.
Great.
All right, that brings us to the end. I am going to drop a link in the chat in case anyone is just like really moved by this experience and wants to donate to Appalachian sustainable development and the work that we're doing, and help keep all this programming free. You could just go in there. That's the ticket link right where you registered for this. You can just add a donation. But before we leave, what's up? What's next for you, Austin? What are your upcoming projects, and where can we find you? Stesh has dropped links to your book and your website quite a bit. If there's anything else you want to share, now's the time.
Great. The website is the best thing. We are looking at expanding our educational offerings. So I have a SARE grant that's specifically for professional silvopasture development. So if anyone here on the call, on the webinar, is interested in more training as a silvopasture or agroforestry related professional, hop on our email list because we will be sending out more information about that. We'll be doing a training here this summer and probably in November as well. In the November timeframe, that would be a 3-day workshop. And then we're going to do that annually, that schedule annually. So a summer 1-day training and a fall 3-day training for the next 3 years. And all that is covered by SARE. So that's very exciting to be able to work with professionals in particular to get more people trained on how to work with farmers to really scale this up. We realize that we can only do so much. Even though we're growing and whatnot, we only have so much bandwidth, and there's a ton of professionals, or there's a ton of need for professionals out there who can help people work with people locally and provide a whole lot more like closer services than we ever could from a distance. So we're excited to have that kind of training and be able to offer that. So there's going to be workshops, but then there's also going to be more and more educational materials that we're able to produce through that SARE grant, and that's going to be freely available. I think both on our website and through the SARE's website eventually.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We hope to see you next time when we chat with Jonathan McRae. And again, thanks to Austin. Thanks for donating your time to this. We really appreciate you. Thanks, everybody who's here. Have a lovely night, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.
Thanks, Emily.